For those who are interested, you can still participate in our little contest to predict what will do better in 2025, Bitcoin or gold. And you can see a link and description in the podcast episode for further instructions. You have to the end of January to participate. And then this week we're adding to the prize a leatherback copy of Mises's Human Action. So please consider participating in the fun of this event. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. Well, I've never been to Cuba, and this is strange given that I've visited Florida more than 100 times, including at least 3 times to Key West, just 90 miles away. I've also been on a couple of Caribbean cruises and have been on islands to the south and east of Cuba. I've seen Cuba from afar. I've been to Mexico a few times and also to Central American countries, but not Cuba. Now, on the face of it, this is very odd, given that Cuba was once a famous vacation destination for Americans. Although we can now travel to Cuba, most Americans have been deprived of various forms of trading with the Cuban people. You know, sugar, cigars, travel, nickel, etc., for their entire lives. We have been hurt. Likewise, the Cuban people have been deprived of trading with Americans and visiting their American relatives. We both have been pawns of foreign policy, and in particular, the military-industrial complex's need for a Cold War. Now, I don't want to dwell on the negatives here, but the Cuban people are suffering from high rates of inflation and currency depreciation, widespread rationing and shortages, and electricity blackouts have become a common occurrence. With more open relations and trade, we can help each other, and the Cubans would be better able to help themselves. Cuba was long a part of the Spanish Empire, and as the Cuban people fought for their independence, America came in and stole the jewels of the Spanish Empire, which also included Puerto Rico and the Philippines, in order to start our own empire by launching the unjustified Spanish-American War in 1898. And this also had the unfortunate effect of bringing the crackpot, warmongering politician Teddy Roosevelt to the center stage of American politics. And of course, this was just really a continuation of taking the colonial property from Spain, which had already spanned from Florida to California. Even though Cubans prospered during the independence period, it was a weak and unbalanced prosperity due to the Crony capitalist model imposed by American protectionism. It was similar to their status as a Spanish colony. In this type of economic model, local leaders are protected from below. That is, the general population, citizen voters. Leaders can exploit the economy, particularly low-skilled labor, as they reward crony capitalists and hand out plunder to their friends. They are also insulated from above. Certain things get imposed by the mother country, but otherwise there is neglect and unresponsiveness. Clearly, these are issues that are major negatives for Puerto Rican economic development. Nobody really denies any of this, and most agree that it was a driving force of the communist revolution in Cuba, as well as the lasting and unifying strength of the Castro regime. Does anyone think this situation is good for Americans? Does anyone think this impasse is good for the Cubans. While Cubans were said to have prospered during the period of Soviet subsidies, and while it is clear that Cuban people have extraordinary economic abilities, you would be hard-pressed to argue that the Cuban economy is living up to its potential. The response of governments, including the US, to shut down their economies and travel in conjunction with the COVID situation had an enormous negative impact on Cuba as vacation travel plummeted. Cubans suffered and their economy is yet to fully recover. A unilateral move on the part of the United States would break the foreign policy impasse and could help unleash Cuban potential. Recognize Cuba, end the embargo. This would include unlimited free trade and travel with Cuba, the return of Guantanamo Bay, full diplomatic relations, etc. Increased trade and travel would benefit both countries. American business investment is sorely needed in the Cuban economy. The country's potential as a retirement destination and business hub for Caribbean, Central, and South American business operations is obvious, and other opportunities abound. Currently, parts and mechanical upgrades to their electrical generation and distribution system are badly needed in Cuba. The small amounts of détente between the countries have been mutually beneficial and have not brought the world to an end. The Cuban government has been willing to open up pockets of its economy to the marketplace. Rather than try to take advantage of Cuba's plight, a more generous stance on the part of the U.S. is called for, as in any case of successful trade negotiations. This might also blunt China's attempt to gain influence over Cuba. The powers that be in both countries don't want to see this opening up of economic relations. In the U.S., we are told, for example, that the Cuban-American population opposes it, and the American sugar industry opposes it. Now, if true, those interest groups depend on our own ignorance of how we would gain and how the Cuban people would gain. You might ask, do Americans really need more sugar? Well, let's just go further down that particular rabbit hole. If we bought Cuban sugar, then the price would go up for and benefit Cubans. The price of American sugar would fall, hurting American producers. But currently, Americans are forced to farm sugar intensely with fertilizers and chemicals, hurting our environment, and even to derive sugar from sugar beet agriculture. An obvious loss of efficiency in our economy and degradation of our resources. Not only would our food be cheaper, tastier, and healthier with less fructose and artificial substitutes, but we don't even know all the other economic benefits that will materialize in the future with a more efficient economy. Now that all the original players in this historical drama are dead, let's think for ourselves. We can turn away from the dark side and put this ugly Cold War chapter in human history behind us. This is very low-hanging fruit in terms of helping people today and creating a brighter future. Viva Cuba Libre!